Hello everyone, this is your host, Diedrich Davis. Coming up next is a new episode of Black Nerds Matter. On this show we get real experiences, thoughts, and advice from different black professionals in the world of STEM. Stay tuned at WMNF Radio for more. Come for the science, stay for the nerds. Hello everyone, welcome back to Black Nerds Matter. Hope you all are experiencing an exciting and fulfilling day. Today's guest is Madeleine Pacheco. She's a second-year PhD student in the Barber Lab at UCLA, a UC Santa Barbara alumna, and an NSF Graduate Research Fellowship recipient. Hey, Maddie, what's up? I'm super excited to have you here. We haven't talked in a while.
Hey, Diedrich. I know. It's really nice to be able to catch up, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So I'm excited to ask you a few questions today. You're our first Hispanic guest on Black Nerds Matter, so come on, hands up. We got this
All
going. Woo, I'm
right.
happy for you.
So excited.
We're breaking
Yeah.
barriers. Yeah,
Awesome.
so can
Thanks
you
for
tell me
having me
about
again.
your upbringing? Oh, yeah, of course, of course. Can you tell us about your upbringing and background and how did your home life and community shape your journey into science?
Yeah, for sure. So I come from an immigrant family, and my parents were never really into science or the environment. And so growing up, I didn't have much exposure to, what science was, what science looked like. We didn't really, go to nature reserves or national parks. And I started discovering that as I got older. But what my family did really influence was the kind of power of education and how you can really use education to change your life. And so from a really young age, I knew I wanted to go to college, I wanted to get an education. And, immigrating to the United States was difficult for them. And a big benefit from immigrating here was for the education. So I think I've really held that close to me as a child and growing up. And yeah, I'm really fond of just learning as much as I can, getting to find out what interests me, what makes me curious, and, really learning about our world. Um, yeah.
Awesome. And as you mentioned before, your Hispanic heritage, how has that shaped your identity as a scientist? And do you feel it's influenced your approach to research or your experience in STEM?
Yeah, I think definitely I come from a very strong and proud Hispanic family that, influences the work that I put in. And I really feel that like my heritage, um, we have a phrase and it's échale ganas, which means like put in that work basically. And so, kind of growing up, like we were always taught to really embrace our heritage, embrace working hard, and kind of going after what we want. And so I'm in a pretty lucky position to, be first generation and go after my dreams. My family has worked really hard to survive and thrive in the United States. And as a result, I've been able to really go after my dreams. And, like I'm a scuba diver now, and I would have never even thought as a kid that that's something I could have done. So, yeah, kind of taking with me, like, also my parents' goals and dreams of, traveling, going to school, and kind of encompassing all that is really something personal to me and something I try to carry with my research and my studies and all that.
That's wonderful. So where did your parents immigrate from?
They came from Guatemala, and it's the country
Okay.
right below Mexico. So we're Central American. And, that's actually something that impacted me growing up because a lot of the immigrant community here in Southern California is Mexican. And so growing up, I kind of had to find my identity with, I'm not Mexican, but I am Hispanic. And where does that fit in? And how am I different or how am I alike to other Hispanic communities? So I've also really gathered some, Guatemalan pride. And, I'm hoping to go back for Easter next year. So that should be pretty fun.
That's wonderful. There's a particular thing in the Black community, and I'm wondering if there's any, if it's similar in Hispanic community, is that we can have some type of animosity when it comes to a Black person from Africa versus a Black person from America, and it'd be like we're talking about, oh, like we talk about to each other and talk about each other in ways like we're not one and we're not the same. Does that happen in the Hispanic community? Like, have you been ostracized by people who were of Mexican descent who moved from Mexico, or Guatemalans that moved from Guatemala?
Yeah, so I was born here. So, kind of as you mentioned, there are some distinctions within the community of like, like, yeah, I'm not Mexican, and Mexicans have, strong cultural pride as well. And so you do notice differences between the Central American countries and South American as well, because we're all, yeah, pretty prideful of where we come. And so, we definitely show that, I feel. And so there is kind of that distinction, as well as how you mentioned being an American citizen or not. And, I have been either alienated or included in certain communities because of my citizenship status, which is an American citizen. And so you do see that. And, there is yeah, kind of either that alienation or that inclusion in certain communities. And it can, yeah, be pretty complex. At the end of the day, it's like, we are Hispanic, and I think we should try to find a kind of united stance.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the whole united stance. That's a big thing in the Black community as well, as saying let's not fight each other, let's kind of fight the system, and that's a big thing. And for context, like I grew up in Texas, so I grew up in an area that had a very high Hispanic population in Fort Worth. And being there, I saw a lot of the almost like grind culture that I got from a lot of my Mexican friends' parents, and just seeing them and like their dad or their mom working really hard, just here and there, and pushing them to go to school and do these different things and go forward. And that's not something I saw with all of my other friends. And that's something that, how has that affected you in science? So I know you're a PhD student, all of that. Do you have like your mom's voice, your dad's voice in your head when you're going through papers, doing your research? You're like, oh, I kind of want to quit and be done. You just hear your mom saying, no, you got to finish, Maddie, you got to finish. Like, what, how's that experience for you?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's really accurate. And actually, when I first got to college, I wrote on a bunch of sticky notes, like things my family have told me, and kind of, these key phrases of like, échale ganas, or there's another one called ponte las pilas. And it's kind of like, get your act together, like tie your shoes up and go running. And so I would have these like key phrases like on the wall of my dorm my freshman year of college. And, I have had the experience of like failing classes and like being discouraged. And, at the end of the day, it's like those phrases have gotten me through some more difficult times. And I definitely do still hear like my family's voices in my head. They help me like keep going and ponte las pilas and all that. But as you were talking about your experience, I also thought about how, Hispanic is an ethnicity. And so you also do see a lot of diversity in the Hispanic community. Like there's Black Hispanics, there's white Hispanics. And so that's also something I've come across with as a PhD student and in academia in general is that, I will meet Latina scientists and Latino scientists, but they'll be white passing. And I do think that's a different lived experience in academia. And so maybe we could talk about that a bit more later, but there is kind of that distinction of, me appearing to be a non-white passing Hispanic.
Yeah. Hey, we don't got to talk about it later. Let's talk about it right now. It seems like it's on your mind and you're ready to talk about it. How was your experience being like Hispanic passing in academia?
I think it's something that I'm kind of always thinking about, like when you're white, you walk into a room full of white people, you don't think about it. Like that's kind of normal to you, right? And so, I'm sure like, people of color have experienced being the only person of color in the room, for example, being the only person of color that's in the scuba diving group. That's something that, yeah, you like it's kind of consciously always in your mind. Where I feel like if you are white passing or if people do think you're white, like they don't automatically think of you as someone else or someone that's not a part of their community versus naturally because of the way, yeah, I present, it's like I've been treated automatically as though I'm not part of a certain community and stuff like that versus, someone who may come from the exact same background as me, just because they look different, they have a different experience. Kind of the experience of being a person of color in science. I've gotten pretty used to walking into a classroom, walking into a science meeting, and I'm the only one with brown hair and brown eyes and, Hispanic presenting and all that. And, it's that's kind of why I'm in science too, is to get people like me and to get people with diverse perspectives into the room, into the conversation. Because, as I said, like there are different lived experiences.
Yeah. Okay. So I know that experiencing that has to have some kind of effect on you. And I'm wondering, were there some adverse effects that you saw? Were there some positive things you saw from being the person that's the only Hispanic person in the room? What was that like for you? And when did you start to notice that and felt like, oh my God, I'm the only Hispanic woman in this room? When did all that stuff kind of start to happen?
Yeah, I think I first started thinking about that when I entered college. I entered as a freshman at UC Santa Barbara here in Southern California, and I entered as a biology major. And so, I started taking chemistry, math, and physics, and all the fun, bio prerequisites. And it was very common for me to walk into, discussion section. And as you said, I'm the only Latina person in the room. Otherwise, like I could walk into a big lecture hall, 800 people, and I look at a section and I'm maybe one of three Hispanic women in the whole section. And so, kind of that shock in college was the first time that I experienced something like that because I did grow up in, a pretty diverse area of Southern California. And so I, off the bat, felt pretty alienated. And then also, like my freshman year, I was trying a lot of things out. I was meeting new people, and I began working with a group called Curiosity. And Curiosity was a group that took or about like fourth, fifth, and sixth graders into science activities and science labs and stuff. And predominantly in Santa Barbara, there's predominantly Hispanic children in like the schools. And so we would take these kids to campus, and, a lot of them were Hispanic or kids of color. And the coordinators of the program and kind of the volunteers of the program were all white. And I joined in this program as a freshman. And one day a girl comes up to me and she's like, "Oh, you're like me." And like, "Oh, you speak Spanish." And I'm like, "Yeah, like I do speak Spanish." And like, we are like each other. And that's kind of like the first time that I started realizing, like, wow, like, these kids aren't seeing themselves in, students and researchers and labs. And I was like, there is such a power in representation. And so as this program continued, we would tour labs, and something I heard really often from professors and from lab managers was that they got into science and they were interested in research because of predominantly their parents. And so I would hear a lot that their parents were professors, their parents were scientists, they would go on yearly vacations with their parents, and that's what got them into diving. And, that's something I thought that was specific to kind of like a higher class of people. And, in terms of like socioeconomic status, like a higher order. And that was my like first kind of experience with really feeling a big alienation, because as a freshman I approached the situation and I was like, oh, I'm not like them. Like, how can I create a lab? How can I start my own lab if, I wasn't introduced to science by my parents? So that kind of really affected me as a freshman. And um, COVID hit when I was a freshman. And so that kind of changed the course of
Oh,
everything. Yeah, I had to stop, participating in Curiosity in that program. I moved back home, but I definitely carried with me like those experiences of Curiosity. And then, I continued COVID at home. Things didn't move much. And then as a junior, I found another program, the McNair program at UCSB. And that program specifically aims to get underrepresented minorities in science and in research and to pursue a PhD. So I joined that community. And then that was like one of the first initial moments that turned that alienation into inclusion, because I entered this room and it was like, wow, there's all these people that come from similar backgrounds as me and all these people that are diverse. And, most of them were first generation, which, being first generation is a pretty unique experience on its own. And so just having like, you know, other minorities in the room and other people that were first generation and kind of understood where I was coming from, I think really helped me change that gear and kind of start the momentum of my scientific career. It was pretty, I think, empowering. That was like one of the first times I truly felt empowered and truly felt capable of the things that I could do, because, I, as a freshman, felt like science and research and labs wasn't a place for me. But through the McNair program and through this community that I was building, I was like, okay, maybe science is for me and maybe research is for me. And I think it's that change that is really what we're looking for, like the next generation of scientists. It's to prove to them and to support them that, yeah, you do have a space here, you do belong, and that is something you can do.
Wow. I wanted to touch on what you were talking about, especially people saying, "Oh, I got into science because my parents are scientists, my parents are professors." That was something I experienced a lot too, and I always thought it was interesting. I'd have people I knew who were like, "Oh yeah, I want to study so and so in Thailand because my mom and dad took me there. I want to study this because I went on a skiing trip in my like my summer home in Colorado, stuff like that." And I was like, my parents are not scientists. My daddy's a credit analyst. My mom's a teacher, and it was very different for me. And the only reason I got interested into what I'm doing is because my parents took us on a trip to just go to SeaWorld and go to the beach because I was born in Florida. So they took me back there and then we'd see different things. And that was cool. And I knew not, even people didn't have my experience with that. Not everyone did. But to see when people have this next level, because I felt I was privileged for sure. But then to see people have this second, third, fourth tier privilege where it's like, oh, I lived in so and so country doing volunteer research. Like that's crazy. And for me, it was insane. As I got older, especially seeing internships where they'd be like, "Oh yeah, you can do this, but for free. Like you don't get paid. Like you have to pay for your room and board." And I'm seeing
Yeah.
people get experience, and I'm like, if your parents don't have any money and you don't have any money, you can't take an unpaid experience and get that type of stuff. You got to go home and get a regular job so that you can help pay for your school. And how you were talking about like the whole privilege that's come with that. It's very interesting just to see and talk to those people, and they're like, "Oh, you don't have a ski membership to the lodge," and they just make it seem like it's a very normal thing. And you're like, no, I've never even knew that was a thing. I didn't know what skiing was until today. You know what I mean? So it's just, I'm glad that you touched on that because that's something that I always thought was pretty interesting how people can be kind of disconnected from either side. Like people that are on this level can be disconnected from people that don't have these things, and people that don't have these things don't know that there are opportunities for these other experiences, whether it's research or just fun stuff that you might not have because you and your parents can't afford it. So I have another question for you. Are there any figures in this Hispanic community, whether it's science or beyond, who have inspired or motivated you in your academic and personal journey?
I think it definitely, it has to be my family, like my sister. Yeah, they've just been so supportive. They've been so strong and resilient. And like their resilience is something that has really, made its mark on me. And I feel like is why I'm so resilient. And, people typically say like a good PhD student is someone who's resilient and, someone who can keep going. And so I feel like, my models, my family have really inspired that in me. But otherwise, I really admire Jose Hernandez, which he's an astronaut, and I actually met him at a conference through the McNair program. And he presented on his life where, he was an immigrant and he wanted to become an astronaut, but he got rejected from NASA, I think, 10 or 11 times. And then he finally got into NASA like the 11th or 12th time or something like that. And so I think that definitely speaks to like our community's resilience and kind of our community's ability to just keep going and not be scared to go after your dreams. Like, I can't even imagine getting rejected 3 times, nonetheless 11 times from the same opportunity. And he just kept going. And so, kind of this theme of really keep going is something that highly inspires me.
Okay. I like how you brought him up. I was gonna say you really went for the safe answer talking about your family.
I mean, it's cheesy, but it's so true. And I feel like the Hispanic community does have really strong familial bonds. Like our communities, our families are really tight knit, and our families oftentimes are our rocks. Compared to some other communities and some other folks that I've talked to, it's like, um, and this is a qualm I have with academia too, but a lot of positions in academia and research just require you to leave and move and like go work at a lab across the country. Versus, I feel like that's pretty hard for Latino scientists because we have a very strong bond with our families, and it is hard to make the decision between staying close to your family or choosing your career and choosing to move to a certain place. So cheesy, but I think very true.
No, I think it was a great answer. I was just giving you a hard time. With some of my good friends from Texas, they would live with their grandmas and their aunts like almost in the whole one big house or all in the same street, things like that. So I'm sure that and that was something I was going to ask you is if it's hard to leave your family, especially going to do work in different countries and different places at because for me with my family, they're pretty much like, go, you're gonna go make money, go have fun, we'll be here. But I never really grew up around my extended family. It was always just me, my mom, and my dad and my brother, just us four in whatever part. So we were used to being away. But I know if you're not used to being away, going to like a French Polynesia or whatever is crazy. You're like, I've never been 20 or 30 miles away from my family for longer than a couple of weeks. Imagine me being there for a month or two at a time. And since we're talking about traveling, how have your travels to different countries influenced the way you view science and other cultures and your role as a scientist? And give us some of the places. I want to hear about all these. I'm looking to book my tickets.
Yeah, I mean, my first experience with field work was out in French Polynesia, which you mentioned. Um, and, you know how awesome French Polynesia is and how awesome Maria is. We're pretty lucky to have that gum station there. But, I think as I've matured into the scientist that I am today, I've really become passionate about parachute science and dismantling parachute science. And so, for those that maybe aren't familiar with it, it's the idea that scientists, mainly Western white scientists, go to developing countries in the non-Western world and conduct their science, in times taking resources and impacting the ecosystem to get results. And then they leave, they kind of extract all the information, all the data they need, and they don't share with the community. They kind of just keep it and go back to their developed country. And that's a huge problem that I'm trying to, play a role in dismantling and kind of going against that grain. Because especially, in ecology and the life sciences where you do have field work, and there are these awesome areas to study, people don't really consider the impact and kind of like the lack of sharing. And so, I went to French Polynesia and I had the awesome opportunity to help the implementation of teaching Tahitian. And so I worked with my lab at UC Santa Barbara, and we recruited some students from the University of French Polynesia, and they actually taught Tahitian to the other researchers at Gum Station. And so, kind of having, um, I guess, methods of connection like that is something I've been passionate about. And so, I went to French Polynesia for 2 years. And most recently this year, I went to Madagascar and Mozambique as well. And it was really, really amazing being able to go out there. I feel like a lot of people don't have the opportunity to go to Madagascar, and I'm super privileged to be able to do so from an internship that I had gotten. And I joined this internship because they're a program focused on providing transdisciplinary training for like abroad field work and kind of how to conduct equitable research and field work. And so I kind of had at the forefront of my mind, how do we avoid this parachute science? And fortunately, they partnered with the Marine Institute in Southwest Madagascar. So it's like the main Marine Institute in Madagascar. And, the team is composed of mostly university students and professors from that university, the Marine Science Institute, as well as a nonprofit in Southwest Madagascar. And kind of having these partners is really important because I'm not Malagasy, I'm not from the area, and it's critical that we do have people that are native to the area in research groups and kind of doing this work. And so as I'm going to places, I also try to focus on community and capacity building because I don't want to show up and do something that another person from the area can do. I want to show up and complement the team and fill in any gaps that the team may need. And so this internship was really awesome because it allowed me to do so. There was a need for scuba diving, and so I got to go out and scuba dive a lot. And yeah, kind of when I went to Mozambique, there was a need for like teaching volunteers, and so I was able to go to the local schools and sorry, my signal cut out, but I was able to go to the local schools and kind of fill in the niche for like teaching kids about coral reefs. I also worked with the the headmaster of the schools and the teachers of the schools. So, kind of having the stakeholders, the community members, and, just the community as a whole at the forefront is really vital to conducting field work. But yeah, I got the opportunity to really visit some gorgeous places, see some beautiful reefs. And I'm really lucky to be able to go and work with the people out there and, dive out there.
That's awesome. I mean, that's so cool just to be able to travel that much. And I think the best part is when you don't have to pay to go to see a new country and do some cool stuff, or you get paid to do it. That is the best. I know we've been talking a lot about science. I know we're here in Black Nerds Matter talking about science and STEM, but I want to talk about you. What's a day in life look like for you? Just regular day to day. How's it going?
Yeah, so right now I'm starting the second year of my PhD, and I am currently, working through data analysis, and I'm trying to get my samples that I collected this summer. And so, my samples in Madagascar, I connected some like environmental DNA samples, and it's a non-intrusive way to just get like water collection, and you filter out the DNA. So I did all that, collected all that, and my samples are currently at the Marine Institute in Madagascar, and we're working together trying to figure out how to get them over here to UCLA where I am. And so, it's just like logistically a lot of emails, like working on R right now, trying to code my data from Mozambique. And, it's a lot of computer work, but I kind of like it because, I was out in the field for 4 months. And so, pretty intense 4 months where it's a lot of physical labor, long, long hours on boats and in the sun. And I love conducting field work, but now it feels like the right time to kind of, shimmer down, work on the computer a bit, and yeah, be closer to home and all that. But for the most part, like I create my own schedule, fortunately, due to the NSF funding. So I kind of wake up when I want. I show up to lab when I want, which I showed up to lab around like 9 a.m. and I was the first one in lab. Like it was completely empty. And so, I coded for a couple hours, had lunch. I'm here right now. And yeah, I'm going to go back to lab after this, code some more, answer some emails. And then I'll end the day off with some yoga. I really, really love doing yoga, and it's kind of a way to protect my mental health. So that's kind of what my days will look like. And like I'll sprinkle in, meetings and seminars and stuff here and there.
Okay. What got you into yoga?
I think so. I have a health condition that causes really bad back pain and back inflammation. And I'm currently trying to figure out what it actually is with doctors, but they're suggesting it's autoimmune. And so it's really tough because my kind of only option is to manage it with like medications, with pills. But I wanted something more holistic and less, big pharma. And so I got into yoga, and I think I first started trying it during COVID. People were doing like 5-minute ab exercises on YouTube or something. And I have stumbled across like these yoga videos. And so initially I started during COVID, but, COVID was tough. So I didn't really follow through. But now that I've kind of had this condition, I found out that yoga was actually one of my biggest defense lines. And so instead of trying to manage it with pills and medications, I try to do yoga every day because, studies also do show it is pretty effective at regulating your physical health and your mental health as well. So for me, it just feels like a nice natural alternative to kind of manage for those things.
You're talking about big pharma when you go to UCLA. Come on, man. Isn't that like one and one?
We're in the life sciences. We're not in the molecular department. So
So you touched a bit on mental health. How have you been managing that going into your PhD? And I know that you're transitioning from being undergrad to PhD. How's all that affecting your mental health and your perception of yourself?
great question. Mental health is something I do try to prioritize. Kind of as you mentioned, I did have this transition from undergrad straight into my PhD, which that's like a pretty big jump to get to. And so in my undergrad, I was kind of accustomed to working really hard, and I was taking a lot of classes and working and doing research all at the same time. And quite frankly, I did start to burn out. And, I had really scary experiences with starting to burn out in terms of my mental health. It got pretty bad in some places. And kind of towards the tail end of my undergrad career, I was like, okay, this is getting bad. This is not healthy. And I do need to prioritize my mental health, or else I'm not going to be able to keep going. Like I did start to feel that impending crash. And so coming to my PhD, I was like, okay, I need to be cognizant of where my mental health is at. I need to make sure that I'm not at the risk of burnout because, I do want this PhD, I do want to finish, but if I burn out and I crash, I won't be able to. And so my first year, I tried to establish some boundaries with grad school. And I was like, okay, I'm going to treat grad school like a job, so I'll treat grad school like a 9 to 5. Once 5, 6 hits, I'll leave my computer, I'll leave lab. And so I tried doing that my freshman year, or my first year, my PhD. And I was like, okay, I'm doing it, but am I really doing it? And so I found myself kind of still being preoccupied with kind of like running thoughts and anxious thoughts even after the workday was over. And coming into my second year where I am now, I feel like my field experiences have kind of changed the way I view things, where in the field, I was really able to disconnect. And I mean, I had to because sometimes, we didn't have electricity and like I couldn't contact people. And so I had to disconnect and really be in the present. Along with, all the physical labor, the scuba diving, the field work, you have to be in the present to, do your job. And so I was like, okay, I think something I'm really going to try to embrace this upcoming year is mindfulness. And what mindfulness is basically like, staying in the present, being focused on what's in front of you. And that's something that I didn't emphasize the first year of my PhD because I was like, okay, the workday's over, but I would still think about it. And so that's not actually resting. That's not actually, taking time for myself and recuperating. But now, I'm really leaning into the mindfulness, and I'm really leaning into, once the workday's over, like I'm not thinking about work anymore. And especially, being in an environmental science field, it can get kind of depressing. Like we learn about how the planet's dying and how ecosystems are dying and, how coral reefs are dying. And so if you don't separate yourself from your work, I realized you are going to start leaning towards that burnout. You are going to get tired. And, if you're not there for yourself and if you're not there for your mental health, then things are going to start going south. So, yeah, I think going forward, like really trying to be in the present and really taking care of myself in terms of physical health and, kind of like racing thoughts and anxiety thoughts and all that is going to be really vital to my success in my second year.
Oh, okay. I I was gonna say something that I've learned a lot about with mindfulness is like you said, being there in the present and thinking about things. I like to think of it almost as a sport or a video game. You're playing a sport, say you're training for basketball, you're playing every day, you're practicing every day, then you go home and you're watching videos about basketball, you're watching the basketball game on TV. You're not necessarily getting a break from it or leaving it. You're just doing it, but in a different form. And I learned a lot that you have to eliminate that form, like eliminate it at all the way when you're doing something else. Like take it all away, take it off your mind and do that. And I've had to do that with work a lot, and especially separating yourself from work, I think is very important when it comes to criticism and things as well. Like obviously environmental science, ecology, things of that nature. Just looking at the environment and seeing things die, whether you're doing some research where you have to kill some things to go out and take off some coral heads or kill some fish, whatever. That already sucks. But if you're taking that on and taking that in on your soul and your mind, and also feeling like that work is you, which I know a lot of people can have, especially people doing their master's or PhD, because you're doing all this work and you're like, this is the embodiment of me, this is my thing. When people attack that work or poke holes in it or tell you, you feel as a personal attack on yourself, so then you can't take any criticism from anyone, and everything feels like they're going at you versus you have to realize that you're not your work. You're just someone who happens to do this. Like you're you. You're Maddie. You just happen to do environmental stuff. The environmental work and the NSF GRP stuff isn't you. It's just part of what you do.
For sure. I think that's a really important distinction that we have to make, at one point in our careers and as students, because, yeah, it's like, as you said, if you start placing, I guess, who you are and kind of your worth into your work, then, things may start to crumble. And so, yeah, I feel like that's something we should all kind of keep at the forefront is, go play basketball, but don't go watch basketball videos at the end of the day.
So what was your moment that inspired your initial interest in science? I like to talk about mine was my SeaWorld moment and going and seeing hammerhead sharks at SeaWorld. What was that moment that just hit it for you where you were like, damn, I'm about to go out and go to Madagascar and swim in the ocean and look at animals for a living? What was that moment for you?
I think, let's see, I feel like I had three key moments in my life where there was kind of like this spark. The first, kind of cheesy, but I watched the movie Dolphin Tale when I was like 10 years old. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love this dolphin, Winter, and I want to be the person that helps the dolphin, swim and live. And so that was kind of my first taste at like, I want to do kind of marine science. I didn't know the title of like marine scientist, but I knew I wanted to be the person that helped the dolphin. And so I kind of carried that with me, but throughout middle school and stuff, I was kind of like, I think I want to be a lawyer or something like that. I don't know why, honestly, but I really love to read and I really love to write. And so I was like, okay, maybe a lawyer. Who knows? I don't know what a lawyer does. But one day, kind of going into the second moment of that spark, I was driving with my mom and I was like 14 years old, and I was thinking about high school and getting college ready and, kind of starting my college application, like college activities as a freshman in high school. And so I knew I needed to volunteer to be a competitive student for college applications. And my mom turns to me one day and she's like, oh, why don't you volunteer at this local aquarium? And I was like, yeah, actually, maybe I should. And she was like, yeah, you really love animals, and I think it'd be fun for you. And I was like, okay, sure, like I'll try it. And so I went into the Aquarium of the Pacific here in Long Beach, California, and I became what they call is a volunteen. So they have a program for 14 through 16-year-olds to be a volunteen. And so as a volunteer, I started learning a lot about marine life, marine ecosystems, how to conserve them, and I started also interacting with guests. I started teaching younger kids about marine ecosystems and conservation, and so I was like, okay, I really, really love this, and the ocean's really, really important. And eventually, I entered the program, and I became an education volunteer. So that's kind of like the next step above here at the Aquarium of the Pacific. And I volunteered as an education volunteer when I was 16. And I was like, okay, I really, really love this. Like, I love learning about sharks and corals and rays. And that's kind of where I feel like I fell in love with marine biology. And, I became more aware of what marine science was. Um, and so, that kind of solidified me going into college as a biology major. I was like, I really loved my time at the aquarium. I also really love like my AP bio classes and my AP environmental science classes. And so it kind of just made sense. And then to the third kind of spark was actually my first time in French Polynesia, which it's kind of hard to not feel a spark like the first time you're there, as you may know. But I showed
Yeah.
up to French Polynesia and I was like, this is the most beautiful place I've ever been in. The water, like you could see up to like 50 meters. Like the visibility was amazing, like this powdery blue type of color that And that was kind of the spark that
Yeah,
I
it's
was like,
insane.
it's crazy. So, I was like, okay, this is really gorgeous. I kind of want to do this for a living. And, kind of likewise, my confidence really got up where I was like, this is something I can do, and this is a path for me. And so that was like the final spark that I was like, okay, I do want to go to grad school and I do want to continue field work in ecology, environmental science. So I feel like, yeah, these three events coupled together is kind of what led me to where I am now. And after French Polynesia, I really started to gain a different appreciation for the environment. I like really started to fall in love with, going to nature reserves, going to national parks, just really being outdoors. Because as I mentioned earlier, I didn't really have much exposure to the outdoors. I didn't feel a personal connection to the outdoors until I went to French Polynesia. And so I've kind of just really carried that with me. And, if you know me, like I have to be outdoors, every weekend. Like I'm kind of never indoors on the weekends anymore. And then kind of going into my most recent field season, I've, yeah, kind of felt another spark of kind of like old things that I knew, but something I've been really leaning into is like our carbon footprints and our overconsumption. Something that's really hit hard for
Hmm.
me, kind of living in Madagascar and Mozambique for a while, was that the United States has this huge overconsumption problem. And it's like, yeah, like that. Like, we develop a lot, capitalism is really strong here, but it's really different living in a situation where you don't have that overconsumption. And so just connecting like this overconsumption with our carbon footprint and kind of how it's quite frankly destroying the planet has been pretty strong for me. So I feel like I am kind of leaning into the space of, okay, like as a marine scientist, I kind of need to walk the walk and I, need to lower my consumption largely. I decided to quit beef because, cows arguably are the second largest carbon emitters after us. And like humans are destroying the planet for cows and for cow consumption. And, I am in a privileged place to be able to stop my cow consumption. And so kind of leaning into these ideas and yeah, I guess keeping them close to me is something that is really like shaping the way I continue as a marine scientist and conservationist.
So I know pursuing a PhD is a major commitment. What motivated you to choose this path over a master's degree, and what do you, or like other than a gap year or something like that, what do you hope to achieve through your PhD?
I honestly kind of ended up in handcuffs by National Science Foundation. So my senior year of undergrad, I, as a part of the McNair program, they had us apply to graduate schools, and we had to apply to a minimum of three. So I was like, okay, like I'll apply just to meet the quota, just to meet the guidelines. And I was like, okay, I'll apply to UCLA, UCSB, where I was, and UCI. Just three easy UC applications. And then around that same
Easy
time,
applications.
I mean, it did take a long time to do those applications, but I was kind of like, okay, I'm doing this for the guidelines of the McNair program. And so around that same time, a member in my lab was applying to this National Science Fellowship. And I was like, okay, I don't really know what that is, but, she seems to really want it. And my advisor at the time was like, hey, as an undergrad, as a senior undergrad, you actually qualify to apply to this fellowship. I was like, okay, like let's apply for fun, I guess. At the time, I didn't know I completely wanted to go to grad school. I was like, okay, I'll apply to grad school. If it doesn't work out, I'll try to start working. A gap year wasn't really ever in the question for me because I need to work. I need to get income somehow, And so I put in my applications, and in the spring of my undergrad, I got the notification that I received the fellowship from National Science Foundation. And it was pretty crazy because I remember I was getting my scientific diving certification. So we're out on Catalina Island here off the coast of California. And it's like 11 p.m. and I have just finished with like a night dive and I'm about to go to sleep. And I got the notification and it was like, congratulations, like you won the National Science Foundation Fellowship. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I don't really know what this means yet, but oh my gosh, I actually won. Like I'd heard about how it was so competitive and I kind of forgot about the application until I got this email sent to me. And I was like, this is insane. Eventually I like fell asleep and the next day my current advisor, Dr. Paul Barber, emailed me and he was like, hey, Maddie, I saw you won the National Science Foundation Fellowship because they actually released your names on like a public website. And so he was like, would you like to join the lab? And I was like, yeah, let me think about it. Like, we'll see. And he was like, yeah,
Shout
like
out
I bet
Paul.
it's a tough decision. Shout out, Paul. He was like, just let me know if you'd like to join the lab, like as you think about your options. And so, I weighed through my options and eventually I did decide to stick with Paul. I mean, Paul, awesome advisor. I think, yeah, I think we're a great fit. And so it was kind of an easy decision going to Paul's lab and going to UCLA after getting my fellowship. So that's where I am now. And I think going forward, I want to hold these, ideals of working towards dismantling parachute science, working towards the conservation of coral reef ecosystems, getting communities involved, and then also increasing the participation of underrepresented minorities in STEM. And so, kind of my journey in science has been one where I've seen a huge lack of representation. And so through my PhD and through my work, I kind of want to be the model that, I didn't really have as I was touring labs and as I was hearing professors talk and, kind of stepping back to that story where I was in the curiosity program and this little girl came up to me and she was like, you look like me, you speak Spanish. Like that really is something that keeps me going and keeps that passion, at the forefront because there is still a huge lack of representation. And there are, the next generation of scientists that are wanting and ready to join, but they don't see themselves. And so they don't continue down the path. So kind of having these passions of mine is something that I'm trying to uphold with my PhD and my future work.
Okay. Are you sure we were friends before? I'm learning so much stuff about you. How come I didn't know this beforehand?
I know, I feel like I didn't really share much. And as I'm coming into my second year, I'm like, I should start sharing my story. And like that's why I really appreciate having this platform too, because it's like, yeah, I didn't know many people that, had stories like mine. And so I realize now it's like I should share my story to maybe, help that little girl continue into becoming a scientist. And having people that don't feel like they belong, seeing someone that's like them and telling themselves, yeah, I do belong. Like if she can do it, I can do it. But yeah, I'm trying to lean into that where I feel like I do have a powerful story and I want to share with it and hopefully help people along the way.
Great. We have one last question for you, and this is one I'm really excited to ask. Imposter syndrome is something a lot of people face, especially in academia. Can you explain what it's been like for you personally and how you've navigated those feelings in your PhD journey? I know that's something that you were really excited to talk about, and I can't wait to hear your input on it.
I think imposter syndrome is definitely a difficult subject to talk about because of the way it's kind of experienced and presented. And it's something, I feel like unique to underrepresented minorities in STEM. And we kind of do have this common pattern of feeling like an imposter. And that can be for many reasons, like one, like actual alienation or kind of just feeling like you don't belong because of XYZ reasons. And so I have really struggled with imposter syndrome, since I've started my science career and since I started college, honestly. I experienced imposter syndrome when I didn't even know the term imposter syndrome. And so it's, kind of this experience where you never feel quite good enough. And that does tend to impact, how you view yourself and how you continue through your work. And, I feel like I always ask myself, like, did I win this because I'm lucky, or did I win this because I actually deserve it? And like, does my work matter? Does any of this matter? And, kind of just feeling like a fraud. And, it's definitely something that's an active journey, something that you have to work towards every day. Yeah, I think like as I'm approaching my second year, the imposter syndrome definitely still lingers. And something new that I've been experiencing is kind of this sort of ageism in academia where, I tell people I'm a PhD student, they're like, oh, really? Like, you look too young to be a PhD student, or like, you don't look like a PhD student. And I'm like, oh, like, what does that mean? Like, yeah, I guess I look young, but I mean, I did work to get here and I am here. And just because I'm young doesn't mean I don't belong here. But it's definitely something I've been kind of grappling with is like a lot of my peers are, 26, 28 years old. And naturally, I just don't have the same amount of life experience as them. Like I just turned 23 and, I'm not going to have logically the same experiences as a 28-year-old. So it's definitely been tough kind of experiencing the new form of imposter syndrome where it's like, I think I'm too young, or kind of deeper, I think I'm too dumb and I don't know enough. But it's like I'm trying to combat that with, I am here and I have earned my way to get here and I'm here for a reason. And although I am younger, like it doesn't mean that I'm not capable. Like I can be young and I could be just as capable as someone that's older than me.
I'm very proud of you for feeling the courage to share that. I'm sure plenty of people that listen to this will have similar feelings to you. And I want you to know that you do matter and the things that you do are important. I mean, if they weren't, people wouldn't give you money, the NSF Fellowship and all that. You know what I mean? Like stuff like that. Like the stuff you do matters and you matter for sure. Thank you so much for sharing that. I want to end on a happy note because I know that can be kind of grim just talking about that. What's a personal win you have, whether it's something small or something big? What's a personal win you've had in the last few weeks that you want to share with us?
I think a personal win I've had is, creating my, I guess, ideal life and ideal schedule as a PhD student. I'm feeling really empowered in that, I have the power to make decisions. I have the power to analyze data. I have the power to come up with research questions. And you're really embracing that I am entering the second year and I, have control over the situation. And that's something that I've in the past, kind of felt like a lack of control. But I think a personal one of mine is that now that I've been back from my fieldwork and back in LA, it's like I am taking ownership and kind of having the courage to say, okay, I'm here and this is my work and this is my life and it's okay and it's great actually.
Great. Thank you so much for being a guest with us today. That's all the time we have. Thank everyone for listening and for attending. We have a special announcement for Black Nerds Matter today. I'm really excited about it. We're going to be present at Black and Marine Science Week in sunny San Diego in December. We'll be having a live recording, and I might be speaking on a panel or two and selling some of these really cool shirts. I know you all want one. Black Nerds Matter, baby. So yeah, I know you guys are all excited as I am. It's been a long time coming, and I'm thrilled to spearhead our first in-person event. If you'll be in attendance at BIMS Week or you're in San Diego, feel free to drop by and say hello. I'm going to be recording people at the event, and I can't wait to get people's inputs. So yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks, Maddie. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you all for tuning into another episode of Black Nerds Matter. None of this is possible without you, our listeners. A special thank goes out to our music team. On guitar is Graham Hempstead, who can be found with his name on any of your favorite streaming platforms, and our sound engineer, Brian, who can be found on TikTok at brian.tyler.music. Thanks everyone for listening.